The cards in this video are completely bonkers. I cannot believe how crazy and how crazy powerful some of these upcoming cards look. Because we got the latest batch of datamined cards. These are set to land in the March season and will likely upend Marvel Snap as we know it if they actually make it to release with these numbers and these effects, which notably does not always happen. These are early data mines. They absolutely can be changed. We see that from time to time, although I think admittedly most of the data mine cards do actually make it all the way to release in that initial form. But nothing here is locked in. Of course, we'll do a full review on these once they're finally revealed. But for now, just sit back because some of these cards are just nuts, as you're already getting a preview here behind me. With the first card we're going to talk about in this video, it's Pixie. And she is a 1/3, which is already a premium stat line here for a 1-drop. And on reveal, shuffle the costs of all cards in your deck. So what that means, the way I interpret this working is if you have, a bunch of 0 and 1 cost cards in your deck and you have a big pile of 6-drops in your deck as well, what that means is some of those 6-drops are very likely to shuffle into a 0 cost card or a 1 cost card. So you might have a 0 cost Blob, a 1 cost Doctor Doom. Now, some of those 6s will shuffle into other 6s. There's obviously some RNG here. I guess technically you could whiff and none of your big stuff would be shuffled. But I think particularly if your deck is built for it, you're very likely to hit at least a couple really significantly discounted 6-cost cards. Now, importantly, this is shuffling your deck, not your hand. So you are going to have to draw into these pieces. And that does introduce some risk because much like you have a 0-cost Blob, you're going to have a 6-cost Wasp. So you will occasionally draw a completely dead card because nobody's going to want to play a 6/1 Wasp. That is, unless you have Mobius. If you then play a Mobius, hopefully not the one that now costs 6, but if it's, for instance, already in hand, or it costs 0 or something, right? You could play a Mobius, reduce all of those so that your Wasp goes back to 0. Their costs cannot be increased beyond their base level, while your 6-drops can still be reduced. So that Doctor Doom or Blob or whatever could still cost 0, but your Wasp would also cost 0 as long as a Mobius is on board. Now, obviously, that works against you sometimes too. If your opponent has Mobius, then your Doctor Doom is going to be reset back to its original cost. But I will say the good thing is, 6-cost Doctor Doom still a good card. 6-cost Blob, still a good card. So even when this doesn't work and you don't hit your Pixie early in the game or that Mobius screws you over, it's not like necessarily all of your cards are dead. And I think what'll happen is you won't have a deck that's just like all 0s and 1s and 6s and it's like split down the middle. I think you'll run a fairly normal curve and you'll still be very happy to occasionally hit like a 2-cost Doctor Doom or a 4-cost Doctor Doom. And I think there are already some deck lists that play really well for this game plan. Things like Lockjaw, for instance, already fits really nicely with that staggered smaller and bigger stuff. So if you whiff on your Pixie, it's not like your entire game plan or deck is just dead now. You're still going to have options. You're still going to have a backup plan, basically. And Pixie still kind of fits in and works in with that mix of that deck. And then you have stuff like Thanos, which is really good too. Automatically adding all of those 1-cost cards to get shuffled up could be amazing as well. I will say Thanos is probably a little riskier because your likelihood of drawing one of your big payoff cards a little bit lower with all of the stones. Stones do cycle themselves into new cards very often, but you might accidentally have like a 6-cost stone that can't cycle that then sort of kills your draw. So for Pixie, listen, the payoff here is absolutely nuts. There will be instances where you top deck like 0-cost Doctor Doom to play on turn 2. And then a 1-cost Blob to play on turn 3 or whatever, right? And I think the good news is actually that there is still that hand as well. So when you play a Pixie, say on turn 1 or whatever, you're still going to have a few cards in hand that stay at their original cost. And I think that will often kind of get you through some of those dead draws. If you do hit that 6/1 Wasp, you're still hopefully going to have some stuff to do, especially if you're not like all in on this game plan, but you still have some stuff to maybe weave in on curve a little bit and then hope to draw into those really high powered payoffs somewhere, within the next couple turns, maybe get one or two. And the good news is too, since those are going to be so freaking cheap, you can probably just save all of your like discounted 6-drops for the final turn and just blow the opponent up with tons of surprise plays. Slam a blob, slam a Dr. Doom all at once. Just go absolutely crazy. I don't know if blob's the right example because of the deck construction requirements that Pixie might require, but you get the idea. The big sort of payoff cards. So for me, I do think some decks fit this really nicely. I think this effect is just so big and allows you to potentially cheat so much energy. The question really will be that kind of draw RNG and the chaos aspect of this. Will that hold the card down too much? I think similar to something like almost like a Mr. Negative deck where you've got these crazy high rolls and crazy low rolls, there will absolutely be decks that make this work. I don't think it's too all in or too risky necessarily. I think it's got some kind of backup plans and some layers there that make sure your deck still functions, but you have those crazy 8-cube wins where you know you're hitting the nuts. You can really surprise the opponent with that like final turn dump. And that's going to make the cube rate on this deck really high, even if it does succumb sometimes to those weaknesses of RNG that chaos, somewhat like Mr. Negative decks often do. But ultimately will be a bit of a deck building challenge, some construction challenges here and how all this unfolds. Could be one of those things that's just really hard to make work and it completely fails. But I see a lot of potential here because Mana Cheat is nuts. Mobius could really enable this deck, and I actually think this could be very, very powerful. So speaking of crazy powerful cards that could warp the meta, let's take a look at Hope Summers, a 3/3 that reads, after you play a card here, you get +2 energy next turn. And of course, that is an enormous amount of energy cheat. So if you play this on turn 3, you could actually follow it up immediately with something like a Wasp. We see that with like Lockjaw decks right now, where the Lockjaw's cheating something big into play. You kind of do the same sort of thing with Hope and a Wasp. You're just cheating that big thing into play like next turn and not relying on the chaos of Lockjaw, perhaps. So, you know, you can play a Wasp on this, and then turn 4, you'd actually have 6 energy. You could play a 6-drop on your Hope, and then you'd have 7 energy on turn 5, and so on, and just go absolutely crazy big with this really quickly in a kind of ramp style deck. That makes a lot of sense to me. If you do this more honestly, you play this on 3 and then play something on 4 that's a really maybe just like a good 4-drop to follow it up or something, you're still going to be able to cheat notable energy on like 5 and 6, weave in smaller things alongside some of your bigger cards as well. +2 is definitely notable because number 1, you can play a 6-drop on turn 5, which is great. On turn 6, you can play a 6-drop and a 2-drop together. Play your Shadow King and your threat. You don't have to pick in these scenarios. So of course we know extra energy is great. This does have some limitations in that, you know, you're not going to have a ton of space behind this necessarily to keep playing to it forever, but you don't need to because this is on a per turn sort of basis. Not to mention, this doesn't say like after the first time you play a card here. So you could actually just dump a bunch of cards on this all at once, like play this on turn 3, and then on turn 4, play like 3 1-drops or something if you wanted to, or stuff that can move away as well, like a Jeff, Nightcrawler, etc., and cheat like +6 energy all at once and have, you know, a turn 5 that's 11 energy, for instance, and just go absolutely hog wild playing a ton of stuff. Move out your move cards, do it again. You get to try again basically and just cheat like ridiculous amounts of energy. So for the same reasons that sort of Angela Elsa package before was good, you can do that with Hope Summers, which also means Kitty Pryde could be absolutely crazy with this. Kitty Pryde, basically you get to scale that Kitty Pryde and she's effectively free for energy because you're getting bonus energy back every turn after you play her. For 1, you're getting that +2 bonus. So this card again just looks completely nuts to me. There's so many great ways to pay off all this extra energy gain, so many ways to work with this, much like we saw in that proven model. Coming down on turn 3 feels a little late sometimes because you got to do it on turn 4, but I think it'll pay off enough that that's not even going to feel like a downside. And as a 3/3, you're not sacrificing too much in a raw stat play either. So all in all, again, a card that just looks very, very powerful with so many different ways to use it well. Speaking of a card that looks really, really powerful, we've got another one. Mockingbird here is a 5/9, but she costs 1 less for each card you have in play that didn't start in your deck. So, I mean, the most obvious synergy here, because she's wearing that shield logo, is a shield deck. Is that really the most obvious? No, of course not. This might be okay in a shield deck, generating a bunch of stuff and playing it, but that's sometimes hard to do because you got to play all those cards. The real most obvious synergy for this, you should be wearing an Infinity Gauntlet logo because it's in a Thanos deck. The Thanos stones do not start in your deck. They're added to your deck at the start of the game. They're not in the deck builder phase. Assuming that works that way as it should, and they don't like change it or set a rule or something, then each of the Thanos stones is going to discount Mockingbird. And as we know, it's not that challenging to get Thanos stones down on board, easily making this like a 2-9, a 1-9, a 0-9 even very often. There are other ways that you could discount this as well. Keep in mind, this doesn't have to be stuff that you play. So something like a Squirrel Girl, for instance, is going to give you those 2 squirrels. That's a 2 discount on Mockingbird. Same thing for Debris, giving you those rocks in play. That's going to discount your Mockingbird again by 2. So you could do summon tokening decks, stuff like Brood, getting those 2 broods, you know, maybe weave in a Mockingbird on your Silver Surfer deck with a Mr. Sinister and broods, and he's got like this power spike card that suddenly feels really good to support that. So again, a card that actually probably has a variety of different homes. I don't think an Agents of Shield thing is going to work all that well. Maybe with Collector and Dinosaur you could get enough, but I don't think this gets cheap enough fast enough in those cases. Paying like full energy for those cards feels a little off to me. Mockingbird's probably too expensive, but Thanos, token summoning decks, both great options here potentially for Mockingbird. Maybe even weaved into like a Patriot deck. We talked about Brood and Squirrel Girl. Is this a power spike for a Patriot deck? Could be nuts. So I don't know, man. Again, a card that can easily go to 0. We know 0 cost things are super powerful. 9 is in a fantastic power level as well, dodging that Shang-Chi. Serving as a really big power spike threat. So playing this as a 1-9, 2-9, all that's going to feel good. Frankly, even a 3 or a 4-9 is not going to feel bad, which means, again, great floor for this card and pretty good ceiling too as a 0-9. So again, really strong, super powerful, highly synergistic card. What is going on? Why are all of these so freaking good? Hey, what do you know? Another card that can warp the meta. This time it's War Machine, a 4/6. His on reveal here is pretty spicy. Until the end of next turn, nothing can stop you from playing cards anywhere. And of course, that is part of Jeff's effect. We all know Jeff has been meta relevant, a staple of sorts, really since his release. That effect can be very, very powerful for playing into inaccessible locations. Often that can just win you a game outright because the opponent doesn't have a card to play into, you know, Sanctum Sanctorum, and you do, and it's like, boom, free location, pretty much going to win this game. War Machine offers you that same luxury with a higher overhead cost, of course, at 4, but he also lets you do it with any future card on that next turn. You could play a Galactus, technically, in a locked off location. Wow, I just realized how... oh, I don't know about that. Galactus the Sanctum Sanctorum and completely screw your opponent out of a game. That's actually pretty nasty. I don't think that would line up too often to be good, but still pretty terrifying. More realistically, right, it's like you play a storm early, you don't really commit to it, you play the War Machine later, and you can play something big in that stormed location, that flooded location if you need to, right? You could play Professor X, cheat it out a little early with a Ravonna, and then play a War Machine on turn 5, and then on turn 6, play whatever you want in your Professor X location. It doesn't have to be a measly Jeff, allowing you to recover a ton of stats, presumably where your opponent cannot. So not only can this actually be used offensively, but of course this can be a tech card of sorts as well against lockdown decks. If your opponent is playing Storm and Professor X and you hate them for it, as many people do, I got really sick of Professor X earlier today, in fact, run a War Machine in your deck and you don't have to worry about it. The opponent locked it out, who cares? I'm running War Machine, I'm still going to play something awesome there on turn 6 and recover that Professor X location. So I think this can both be used offensively as a way for you to kind of set up win conditions of sorts, almost where you're locking things out and then still able to contest them really easily, or it can be used defensively as that tech card to protect you against the meta, as it were. And as a 4/6, we've seen some of these 4/6 stat lines, you know, Iron Lad being the classic example, where it feels okay very often to play a 4/6, especially if you're running a Zabu deck. Maybe this is a tech card against those lockdown metas. We see Shang-Chi, we see Enchantress, well now maybe we see War Machine, specifically to beat Storm or Professor X or whatever else might pop up. So a card, once again, all of these so far with a lot of utility, a surprisingly powerful sort of effect that I think fits into a variety of different metas and a variety of different decks. Again, a really good card. So finally, moving on to our fifth card, I will say this is probably the least exciting to me, but that doesn't necessarily make it bad. This is Cannonball, a 5/8. With on reveal, move an enemy card away from here and add a rock where it was. If it can't move, destroy it to add the rock. So long text line here, but basically we kind of have like a Stegron plus. You'll remember Stegron maybe very rarely seen. 4/6, perhaps soon to be a 4/7 based on kind of an accidental buff that hit the client earlier today. Maybe he's going to be a 4/7 in the future, who knows. But this is a 5/8 version that does the same thing, moving a card away, but he's going to leave a rock in its place, which can be beneficial, of course, because it can make it harder for your opponent to add power to that location later if they don't have a bunch of available space, or if they had already filled up a location, then this could be a way to keep it full while still moving power away from there. Now, of course, you could also try to force them into full locations with something like a junk deck, and then they have like one card there that's powerful, and you use Cannonball to try to move away that one powerful card and leave behind a rock in its place. But if you're like sending a bunch of junk over to them already, you might kind of move the wrong things, leaving some power behind. I don't know if I feel like this is a great payoff necessarily to a junk deck, more so as something you try to use as a general use card, although I see some challenges for it there as well. It's kind of just like that bigger Stegron. The second half of this, though, is perhaps where things get more interesting. If it can't move, destroy it to add the rock. So if your opponent actually has two other full locations, you might be able to just wipe the card out altogether. So, you know, they've kind of like been a Thanos Zoo deck or something that sort of filled up the board early. They played like a Professor X in one spot to lock that down. They filled the other up with like Stones and Devil Dinosaur or something, and they're hoping to win that final spot with like you know, a big bomb threat. I guess it would often be Blob in this case, which is funny because Blob has the text that he can't move. So maybe this always destroys a Blob. Is this like a Shang-Chi against Blob because of Blob's text? Yeah, maybe, but pretend it's some other generic gigantic thing, an Infinite or whatever. If the Infinite has nowhere to go, then Cannonball is going to destroy it and serve as a really big swing in particular. Now, notably, much like sort of you know, Spider-Man 2099 or Stegron 2, you don't really get to pick your target. If there are multiple things, you might hit the wrong one. You might move a small stone instead of a big threat or something and feel like your Cannonball was actually pretty wasted. So in a lot of ways, this does kind of feel like a Stegron plus that doesn't really change that much. Like, there is obviously an extra upside here in sort of both sentences of this text, but how impactful that actually is in game states, I don't know how often it'll really feel that important or that good. It will serve as a destroy effect sometimes on turn 6 for opponents and decks who really build out the board, but how often are you going to hit a great thing? You know, you're going to hit a 1-drop instead of a 6-drop. Yeah, it's going to whiff sometimes. So even in those scenarios where it does do that extra thing and it feels like a big bonus, even that has some notable downsides and risks built in. 5/8's a good stat line, or good-ish. It's not crazy good, but is that enough? I don't know, man. This feels like Stegron, and Stegron's just not a card we ever see. Stegron's not very good, and I don't know that this amps things up enough from Stegron to really feel all that compelling. So maybe the one weak point of this entire month, and not even that crazy bad. Still pretty interesting card. So all that said, let's rank these cards from the ones I think are going to be the best to the worst, which in a lot of ways is arbitrary because I think so many of these are going to be ridiculously good. My number 1 card is Hope Summers. My number 2 card is Pixie. My number 3 card is Mockingbird. My number 4 card is War Machine, which is kind of crazy to say because I think this is a good card. And my number 5 card, of course, is Cannonball. And there you have it, folks. That wraps it up for this look at the latest leaked cards. Do you guys think these are as crazy as I do? Like, am I overrating these, or are these effects just kind of nuts? Like, each of these is just so impactful. It's no like just basic boring cards. They're all doing something really significant, and I think a lot of them are going to feel really good. So curious to hear your thoughts down in the comments below. Thank you much as always for watching, and until next time, game on.